What happens when a man who went from sleeping in his car to becoming one of the most successful entertainers in America sits down across from a host who thinks she can tear him apart with clever insults, only to discover that some people have been through too much to be intimidated by words? What you're about to witness is one of the most satisfying confrontations ever captured on daytime television. The moment when Steve Harvey, the man who built an empire on making people laugh, turned the table so completely that his attacker had no choice but to flee the battlefield. The studio went silent. The audience held their breath. And then something happened that had never happened before in the history of The View. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to subscribe and drop your thoughts in the comments because, trust me, you're going to want to talk about this one. The morning had started with the usual energy at the View studios. Steve Harvey was coming on the show to promote his latest venture, and everyone expected the interview to be entertaining. Steve had a way of lighting up any room he walked into, a natural charisma that had taken him from a struggling stand-up comedian to a media mogul with a portfolio that included television shows, books, and a radio empire that reached millions of listeners every day. Steve arrived at the studio dressed impeccably in one of his signature suits, his famous mustache perfectly groomed, smile already warming up the production staff before the cameras even started rolling. At 67 years old, he had achieved a level of success that most people could only dream of. But he had never lost the common touch that made him relatable to audiences across every demographic in the green room. His team reviewed the talking points, but Steve waved them off with a laugh. He had been doing interviews for 30 years. He didn't need preparation. What he needed was to be himself, because that authenticity was what had gotten him this far. What nobody anticipated was that Joy Behar had arrived at the studio that morning, determined to knock him off his pedestal. Behind the scenes, sources would later reveal that Joy had been making dismissive comments about Steve for weeks. She found his self-help advice simplistic. She said his relationship books were condescending. His whole folksy, down-home persona felt calculated, to her a carefully constructed image designed to appeal to people she considered unsophisticated. Today, she had decided she was going to expose what she saw as the real Steve Harvey beneath the polished surface. The studio lights were bright as Steve took his seat at the famous table. He greeted each host with genuine warmth, his booming voice filling the space with infectious energy. The audience gave him an enthusiastic welcome, many of them regular viewers of Family Feud who had come specifically to see him in person. Whoopi Goldberg opened the segment with obvious affection. Our next guest is a man who does it all: television host, comedian, author, radio personality, and, according to my sources, the owner of more suits than any man should legally possess. Please welcome Steve Harvey. The applause was warm and sustained. Steve stood up briefly to acknowledge the audience, turning in a circle with his arms spread wide, showing off his perfectly tailored navy blue suit. What can I say? A man's got to look good. That's the first rule of success right there. The audience laughed appreciatively. This was the Steve Harvey they had come to see: confident, charming, and endlessly entertaining. Sarah N. asked about his latest project, and Steve launched into an engaging description that had the audience hanging on every word. You know, what I've learned after all these years, Steve said, leaning back with the ease of someone completely comfortable in his own skin. Success isn't about being the smartest person in the room. It's about being the hardest working. It's about getting up every time life knocks you down. And let me tell you, life knocked me down plenty before I figured that out. The audience nodded along, connecting with his message. For a few minutes, everything felt exactly as it should. Then Joy Behar leaned forward with that familiar, predatory glint in her eyes, and the energy in the room shifted noticeably. "So, Steve," Joy began, her voice carrying an edge that made the other hosts exchange nervous glances. You talk a lot about success and hard work. But let's be honest here. A lot of your success has come from telling people, especially women, how to live their lives. Your book, Act Like a Lady, Think Like a Man, was basically a manual for how women should behave to catch a man. Don't you think that's a little condescending? A man telling women what they're doing wrong? The question was clearly designed to put Steve on the defensive. Several audience members shifted uncomfortably, but Steve's expression didn't change. If anything, his smile got a little wider. "Oh, Joy, that book sold over 3 million copies," Steve replied, his voice carrying the easy confidence of someone who had heard this criticism before. So. Apparently a few women found it helpful, but I understand your concern. It must be frustrating to see someone give advice that actually works when you've been giving advice on this show for years and the divorce. Rate hasn't budged. The counterpunch landed with precision. The audience let out a collective gasp that quickly turned into laughter. Joy's expression flickered with surprise, but she recovered quickly. "That's cute, Steve. But let's talk about your own track record with relationships. You've been married 3 times. 3 times. Don't you think there's something a little hypocritical about a man who couldn't make 2 marriages work writing books about how to have successful relationships?" Steve nodded slowly, completely unfazed by the attack. "You're absolutely right, Joy. I've been married 3 times. You know why? Because I kept trying until I got it right. That's what winners do. They don't give up after 1 failure. They learn from their mistakes and try again. My 3rd marriage has been going strong for almost 20 years now. How long have your marriages lasted?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Joy's face flushed slightly. "We're not talking about me. We're talking about you." "Oh, I see," Steve said, leaning forward with a knowing smile. "So you can dig into my personal life, but yours is off limits." That's an interesting standard for journalism. Joy, do they teach that in the handbook? Or is that something you came up with yourself? The audience laughed again, louder this time. They were beginning to sense that this wasn't going to go the way Joy had planned. Sunny Hostin was trying to hide a smile behind her hand. Even Whoopi looked like she was enjoying watching Joy get a taste of her own medicine. Joy tried to regain control of the conversation. "Look, I'm just pointing out that you've built a career on giving advice about things you're not exactly an expert in. Relationship advice from someone who failed at marriage twice. Life advice from someone who admits he barely finished high school. Don't you think people deserve better credentials from their gurus?" Steve's expression didn't waver, but something in his eyes sharpened. "Barely finished high school. Joy, I grew up in Cleveland in a working-class family. I didn't have the luxury of going to fancy schools. But let me tell you what I did have. I had hunger. I had determination. I had the willingness to fail over and over again until I succeeded." He paused, his voice dropping to something more serious. "You want to talk about credentials? My credentials are sleeping in my car for 3 years while I tried to make it as a comedian. My credentials are performing in clubs where people threw things at me because I wasn't funny yet. My credentials are being so broke that I had to choose between eating and putting gas in my car. Those are my credentials, Joy the School of Hard Knocks. And that degree is worth more than any piece of paper hanging on a wall." The audience erupted in applause. Steve had turned her attack into a triumph. Using his humble beginnings as proof of his authenticity rather than something to be ashamed of, Joy's face had gone red, but she wasn't ready to give up. "That's a lovely story, Steve. Very inspirational. But let's talk about something more recent, the Miss Universe incident. You announced the wrong winner on live television in front of millions of people. You humiliated that poor woman. And then you somehow turned your massive failure into more fame. Don't you think there's something wrong with a culture that rewards incompetence?" The mention of Miss Universe made several people in the audience shift. It was the moment that should have ended careers, the kind of public failure that most people never recovered from. But Steve just smiled. A wide, genuine smile that seemed to fill the entire studio. Joy, I'm so glad you brought that up. That was the worst moment of my professional life. I made a mistake that was seen by hundreds of millions of people around the world. And you know what I did? I apologized. I took responsibility. I didn't make excuses or blame anyone else. I stood there on that stage and I owned my failure completely. He leaned forward, his eyes locked on Joy's face. Now, let me ask you something. When was the last time you apologized for anything on this show? When was the last time you said something wrong, hurt someone's feelings, made a mistake and actually took responsibility for it? Because I watch this show sometimes, and I see a lot of opinions being thrown around. But I don't see a lot of accountability when those opinions turn out to be wrong. The question hit its mark with devastating precision. Joy's mouth opened, then closed, again no words coming out. The audience fell completely silent, sensing that something significant was unfolding. The difference between you and me, Joy, Steve continued. His voice calm but edged with steel, is that? I know I'm imperfect. I know I make mistakes, and I'm not afraid to admit it. But you sit at this table every day acting like your opinions are facts, like your perspective is the only valid one. Like anyone who disagrees with you is somehow less intelligent or less worthy of respect. He shook his head slowly. That's not journalism. That's not even good conversation. That's just ego dressed up as expertise. And the really sad part. You've been doing it so long, you probably don't even realize it anymore. The observation landed hard. Joy's posture faltered slightly, her usual confidence slipping. I think you're being oversensitive to legitimate criticism, she replied, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. Steve laughed, warm, genuine, effortless, and somehow that made it hit even harder. Oversensitive. Joy, I slept in my car for 3 years. I've been heckled in comedy clubs, rejected by networks, doubted by people who thought a black man from Cleveland had no place succeeding in this industry. You think a few questions from you are going to make me oversensitive? He spread his hands, still smiling. I've faced real adversity, real struggle, real failure, and I'm still here. Still smiling, still winning. So, with all due respect, you're going to have to try a lot harder than that if you want to rattle me. The audience erupted in applause. Steve had deflected every attack and somehow turned each one into a moment of strength without losing his composure. Sarah tried to redirect. Maybe we should talk about Family Feud and the incredible run you've had. But Joy wasn't finished. Actually, I have one more question. You talk a lot about your faith, about God's plan, but you've also made comments people found offensive about atheists, about other religions. How do you reconcile being a man of faith with saying intolerant things? It was meant to be the knockout blow, but Steve didn't flinch. Joy, I'm a Christian. I believe what I believe. And yes, I've said things I've had to clarify or apologize for, because I'm human. I'm still learning. He leaned forward slightly. But here's what I find interesting, you're questioning my tolerance. While sitting at a table where you've made intolerant comments about people of faith for years. A pause, sharp, intentional. You've mocked Christians, dismissed religious people, made fun of beliefs millions of Americans hold sacred. So before you come at me about intolerance, maybe take a look at the glass house you're sitting in. Joy's face flushed deep red. That's not the same thing. I question beliefs. I don't attack people, don't you? Steve's tone stayed calm, but the words cut deeper, because it sure feels like an attack when you question someone's marriages, their education, their faith, all in 10 minutes. It feels like an attack when you bring up the worst moment of someone's career just to humiliate them. It feels like an attack when you suggest someone doesn't deserve their success. He paused, letting the silence do the work. I came here for a conversation. Maybe to make people laugh. Maybe to make them think. But you had a different agenda. His gaze stayed locked. You wanted to tear me down. To prove you're smarter, better, more sophisticated. A slight smile returned calm, controlled. And the funny part, Kay, in trying to prove all that, you've actually proven the opposite. The studio went completely still. What's that supposed to mean? Joy demanded, her voice shaking. Steve leaned back, relaxed. Almost sympathetic. It means truly confident people don't need to tear others down to feel good about themselves. Truly intelligent people can disagree without being disagreeable. And truly sophisticated people know how to treat guests with basic respect even when they don't agree with them. A beat you spent this entire interview trying to make me look bad. But all you really did was show everyone exactly who you are when you think you have the upper hand. Asterisk, and I've got to tell you, Joy, it's not a good look. Not a good look at all. The audience erupted this time louder than ever. Applause rolled through the studio, people rising to their feet, some even cheering. Joy looked around, panic flickering across her face as the realization hit she had completely lost control of the moment. This is ridiculous, she snapped, her voice rising. I asked legitimate questions, and you've turned this into some kind of personal attack on me. Steve shook his head slowly, that calm, unshakable smile still in place. No, Joy. You turned it personal when you questioned my marriages, my education, my faith, and my right to give advice. I just responded. A beat? The difference is I did it with facts and humor, not sneering condescension. That line landed hard. That's the difference between someone who had to win people over and someone who grew up thinking their opinion was all that mattered. Joy pushed her chair back abruptly, the scraping sound cutting through the noise. I don't have to sit here and be insulted by a game show host. She fired back, her voice trembling. Steve didn't raise his voice. Actually, Joy, that's exactly what you do for a living. You sit there and insult people every day. The only difference is today, someone insulted you back. A pause. And apparently, you can dish it out, but you can't take it. The audience exploded. It was the kind of moment that lives forever. Replayed, shared, quoted. Joy stood frozen for a second. Her face a mix of anger and embarrassment. Then, without another word, she turned and walked off the set. Gasps. Then even louder cheers. The remaining hosts sat stunned, unsure what to say. Finally, Whoopi broke the silence. Well, think we need to take a commercial break, but Steve gently raised his hand. Before we do that, I just want to say something. The room quieted instantly. I didn't come here to fight. I didn't come here to embarrass anyone or prove anything. I came here to have a conversation. He looked out at the audience. But when someone comes at you with disrespect, you've got two choices. You can let them walk all over you, or you can stand up for yourself with dignity. A small nod. I chose dignity. His tone softened. I've been blessed. I've gone from having nothing to more than I ever dreamed of. And along the way, I learned something important. You teach people how to treat you. If you accept disrespect, it continues. If you respect yourself, most people will respect you too. A slight smile returned, and the ones who don't, well, they usually end up walking off sets. The audience laughed warm, appreciative this time. Steve leaned back, completely at ease. Now, I believe you wanted to ask me about Family Feud, Sarah? And just like that, the tension dissolved, the show moved on. Steve remained exactly what he had been from the start: funny, composed, effortlessly likable. But everyone in that studio knew they had witnessed something rare. Not a shouting match. Not chaos, control for the first time. A guest hadn't just defended himself, he had completely flipped the power. It's dynamic. Not with anger, not with cruelty, but with composure, clarity, and quiet confidence earned through real struggle. As the credits rolled and the audience filed out, still buzzing, one thing was clear. Steve Harvey didn't just walk in as a guest. He walked out as a moment people wouldn't forget. Because what he showed wasn't just how to win an argument, it was how to handle disrespect without losing yourself. In a world that rewards outrage, he proved something different. That calm confidence will always hit harder.